Welcome to Discovering the Ancient Paths. I am Pastor Mark Biltz of El Shaddai Ministries. We meet every Saturday morning in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. One of the most exciting things we do is to look at the New Testament through the lens of the culture during the very days of the Messiah. We also go through the Torah, or the first 5 books of Moses, throughout the entire year, dividing it into 52 sections, so over the year, all 5 books are covered. Remember after the resurrection, on the road to Emmaus, how the disciples' hearts were burning as Jesus opened up the Old Testament to them in ways they had never seen. That's what we do every week. Join us on the journey of your life right here at El Shaddai Ministries, meeting every Saturday morning right here in Tacoma, Washington from 10 a.m. to 12:30. We'll see you there. All right, today's Torah portion, the Parsha is Miketz. And what does Miketz mean? The end. The end. Well, guess what? We're reaching the end of the book of Genesis. One of the things I want to bring out, though, too, as a side note, you know, also with every Torah portion comes the Haftorah portion. It's a section from the prophets that read with the Torah portion. And then, of course, as believers, we also add the Brit Hadashah, or section from the New Testament. I don't always cover the Haftorah or the Brit Hadashah, but I just wanted to mention to you that they say, according to many sources, the idea of having the Haftorah started during Hanukkah. And the reason why was Antiochus said they weren't allowed to read from the Torah. So if they're not allowed to read from the Torah, I guess we'll grab a section of the Haftorah. And so that is where it all began. Because the Greeks had prohibited observing the Sabbath. And so they thought, well, let's just go to the prophets or the writings and we'll cover that. So that's where it came from. Now, but let's go to Genesis 41. And we're going to look at verse 1 through 3. It says, it came to pass at what? Miketz, there it is. Of 2, how many years? Full years. Okay, and when it says 2 full years, what that's referring to is Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So you need to understand these events happened on Rosh Hashanah, and I'm going to prove that to you here in just a little bit. But Pharaoh has a dream. He's standing by the river, and there came out of the river 7 well-favored cows. Now, just another side note. All too often in Christianity, we think of cows, because it says cows. But many think they were hippos, and a female hippo is called a cow. But anyway, more than likely, hippos come out of the river, cows don't. But so anyway, just you may want to change your thinking a little bit. But either way, behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored cows and fat, and they fed in the meadow, which is what hippos also do. And behold, 7 other came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and skinny, and stood by the other ones on the brink of the river. Okay, let's jump over to Exodus for a minute. Look at chapter 23, verse 14 through 16. Notice it says, 3 times you're to keep a feast to me in the year, the feast of unleavened bread. You're to eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you, in the time of the appointed of the month Aviv, which means spring. For in it, this is when you came out of Egypt, none of you shall appear before me empty. And the feast of harvest, that is Shavuot, which occurs in the summer, the first fruits of your labor, which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering, that's in the fall. That's where the fall feasts are, which is what? At the end, Miketz of the year. So this is telling you right here, according to the harvest, the fall harvest is the end of the year. So many people don't realize there are several calendars. Yes, Nisan 1 is the beginning of the religious calendar, which would put Adar at the end of the year. But here this is telling us the fall feasts are at the end of the year because they're referring to the agricultural year, not the religious year. All right, so anyway, so here's at the end of 2 full years, and of course in Genesis, that's the only calendar they had. They didn't have Moses' calendar back then anyway. Okay, so this is referring to Rosh Hashanah. So I believe, and it is believed, that Pharaoh's dreams and Joseph suddenly appearing before Pharaoh all occurred on Rosh Hashanah. Why is that? Okay, well, look at Leviticus 23:24. One of the things, let's go to Genesis 41:9. First, let's go to Genesis 41:9. Then spoke the chief butler to Pharaoh, saying, "Oh, I remember my faults this day." Well, guess what? Let's take a look. I got a little picture here, and I'm going to show you how these things happened on Rosh Hashanah. First off, Rosh Hashanah is the time to reflect on your faults, to make New Year's resolutions. And here the butler is remembering his faults. Look at Leviticus 23:24. It says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month," that's Tishri, "in the 1st day of the month," that's Rosh Hashanah, "you shall have a Sabbath, a memorial, a blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation." Okay, so it's a day of remembrance. That's what it's known as, a day of remembrance. And guess what happens? The butler remembers something. All right. Now, it also begins the 10 days of repentance to Yom Kippur. So not only does he remember, he repents, he confesses his sin. Now, we also find Rosh Hashanah is known as the day of the coronation. And look at Genesis 41, verse 40 and 41. Pharaoh tells Joseph, "You're going to be over my house. According to your word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." So here Joseph is crowned as the second in command of all of Egypt on this day. It's also, Rosh Hashanah is known as the day of judgment. Yom Hadin, okay, God judges. And what happens? The butler's been judged. The baker's been judged. Joseph has been judged. Egypt is about to be judged. And then look at this in Genesis 41. This is the first half of verse 14. Pharaoh sent and he called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. Notice how they brought him hastily, which means in a quickness. Salvation ends up coming to Egypt, to Israel. Look at Isaiah 56:1. It says, "Thus says the Lord, keep judgment, do justice, for my salvation is near to come." And we know the Hebrew word for salvation is Yeshua, and my righteousness is about to be revealed. Now, according to the sages, it is said that just as the redemption from Egypt happened quickly, okay, where there was not even time for the dough to rise, so it will occur in the future redemption as well. And so it's like, wow, look, in a blink of an eye, they were taken out of Egypt. Within 24 hours, blink of an eye, they were redeemed. Well, they believe in Israel that the second redemption, or Messiah coming, is also going to happen in what is called the blink of an eye. Listen to Revelation 3:11. How does Yeshua say he's going to come? Quickly. Hold fast at what you have. Let no man take what? Your crown. One sage commented that every one of God's salvations, whenever he did any type of redemption, it happened in a moment. Look at Malachi. This is chapter 3 and verse 1. God says, "Behold, I will send my messenger. He shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek shall," how shall he come? Suddenly to his temple. "Even the messenger of the covenant whom you delight in. Behold, he shall come, says the Lord of hosts." All too often we seem to think that, oh, I've got plenty of time and I'll get right with God, when I'm ready. I'm not ready. I have to get things taken care of all by myself, and then I'll be ready to present myself before God. How many of you know that never works? I tell you what, because when things happen suddenly, how many of you know earthquakes happen suddenly? How many of you are expecting an earthquake in the next few seconds? We're not, okay. Well, that's the thing. When Messiah comes, it's going to be so quickly, you're not going to have time to prepare. You're either already prepared or you're not. Now, here's what a lot of Christians don't realize, but there's a popular saying within Judaism that says that the salvation of God is like the blink of an eye. It comes from the fact that within the space of one day, Joseph went from prisoner to president. One day. At the Exodus, Israel went from slavery to freedom in one day. And Paul, the Rabbi Shaul, the Apostle Paul, was drawing on this concept that was already prevalent within Judaism when he said in 1 Corinthians 15:52, in what? In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the what? Last trump, The trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we will be changed. The Hebrew phrase is haraf ayin. That's the blink of an eye. So Paul wasn't coming up with something new. He was coming up with something that was common within Judaism, that all of God's salvations will come in the blink of an eye. As a matter of fact, look what Daniel says in chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. At that time, Michael will stand up, the great prince, which stands for the children of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was, since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered, every one that is found written in the book. How many of you want to be found written in the book? Guess when the books are opened? Rosh Hashanah. Hello, the books are opened at Rosh Hashanah. Again, this is telling us these events are going to happen on Rosh Hashanah. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall what? Wake up. Some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. I believe that the not Saul, or the resurrection of the dead, will take place on Rosh Hashanah in the blink of an eye. All right? So, I don't know, it can't happen at any moment. I mean, as far as if it's not Rosh Hashanah, don't expect the resurrection of the dead to take place. But on Rosh Hashanah, it'll happen in the blink of an eye. We don't know what year. We don't set dates. So, haraphayin means more than just the blink of an eye. It means don't let your guard down. How many of you know if you have a pool in your backyard and you have a little 2-year-old, what can happen in the blink of an eye? That it can happen in the blink of an eye. And that's why this whole concept also means don't let your guard down. Now, Miketz means the end or the last. And these events happen at the last trump. Again, pointing to Rosh Hashanah, when the resurrection of the dead. Well, guess what? Joseph was resurrected from the pit also on that very day. Now, the other thing, when this Miketz, meaning the end, also it can refer to the last. How many of you know that which has happened is that which will happen again? Okay. All of history, this earth is like a stage. We have, throughout the thousands of years, different actors, okay, but it's the same play that's happening over and over again from different perspectives. Well, here's the thing. This teaches us that Pharaoh's dreams not only speak of what happens at the end of Joseph's last 2 years, but also that which will happen at the end of the last 2,000 years, okay, beginning the Messianic era. We know that at the end of 2 years, Joseph was exalted as co-ruler over the whole land. This tells us that at the end of 2,000 years, Yeshua ben Yosef will also be the ruler over all the nations of the world. How many of you can hardly wait for that to happen? Yay! Now, look what Pharaoh says concerning Joseph. In Genesis, this is chapter 41. Let's look at verse 38 and 39. Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" I think that's fascinating that he recognizes the Spirit of God. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, "For as much as God has showed you all this." See, Joseph gave all the credit to God. He said, "It's not in me to interpret dreams, God." And here Pharaoh is acknowledging that, okay, Joseph, you didn't say you're so smart that you just figured this out, but you revealed that God is the one who showed you all this. He says, "There is no one so discreet and wise as you are." In other words, he's acting very politically correct. And look at this in Genesis 41, verse 42 and 43. I think I added that verse if it's not on your notes. Okay, look at this. So Pharaoh takes the ring off his hand. He puts it on Joseph's hand. He arrays him in vestures of fine linen, puts a gold chain about his neck, and made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And look what everyone is crying before Joseph. What? Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. I can't help but think of Philippians chapter 2, verse 10, where at the name of Yeshua, every knee is going to bow, of things in heaven, things in the earth, things under the earth. Can you imagine whether they are opposed to Yeshua or not, they're going to be brought to their knees. As a matter of fact, look at Romans chapter 14, verse 11. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to who? Me, and every tongue shall confess to God. Well, where is that written? That is written in Isaiah. Let's take a look at it. Chapter 45 and verse 23. It says, give the word, put forward your cause, let us have a discussion together. Wow, can you imagine? God says, hey, let's sit down and have a talk. He says, who has given news? True news, not fake news, of this in the past. Who made it clear in early times? Did not I, the Lord? There is no God but me, a true God and a Savior. There is no other. Let your hearts be turned to me so that you may have Yeshua. All the ends of the earth, for I am God. There is no other. By myself have I taken an oath. A true word has gone from my mouth. It will not be changed. That to me every knee will be bent and every tongue will give honor. Okay, how many gods are there? And to him, how many knees will bow? Every one of them. And I think it is interesting that at the name of Yeshua, every knee will bow. What does that seem to imply? Okay, now let's look at Genesis 41, verse 45. Pharaoh calls Joseph's name Zaphnath Paneach. Okay, this comes from the verb tzaphon, which means to hide, to treasure, to encrypt. At the Passover ceremony, there's something called the tzafun, where you break the matzah, put it in a cloth, and then you do what? You hide it. Okay, and then at the third cup, kind of like the third day, all of a sudden it's resurrected again, speaking of the redemption of Yeshua. But so basically that name means he who explains what is hidden. That's what Zaphnath Paneach means. He's the decoder of secrets, or the decoder of mysteries. So let's take a look at Genesis 41 now, verse 49 and 50. Because the 7 good years come first, we see Joseph gathers grain as the sand of the sea, very much, until he decided to quit counting, for it was without number. And then it says, to Joseph were born 2 sons, and this was before the 7 years of famine, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, bore to him. Okay, so now he has a couple of kids before the years of famine come. Now let's look at verse 51 through 53. Look at what Joseph calls his firstborn son, Manasseh. And who remembers what Manasseh's name means? Forget it. How many of you said forget it? That's what he names his firstborn son. I want to just forget it. I want to forget all the pain of my past. He says here, God has made me to forget all of my toil and all of my father's house. He had received so much pain from his family. Here his mom has died. His dad doesn't believe him and mocks his dreams. His brothers are all out to kill him. They sell him into, they want to sell him into Egypt. And he just wants to forget all of his pain. And then the name of the second son, he calls Ephraim or Ephraim, which means what? Fruitful, successful. And he says, because God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And then the 7 years of plenty that was in the land of Egypt were ended. Now, here's something else. I don't believe this was any random 7 years. This was the 7-year Shemitah cycle. I believe the first year of plenty happened in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The 7th year of plenty happened in a Shemitah cycle. So now the 7 years of famine happen according to a 7-year cycle. This is what I think Christians really need to understand to get on God's calendar. Okay, so where are we right now? 5781 is what year of the Shemitah cycle? It is the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. That means this is the year of triple blessing. Okay, this year that we're in right now is going to be triply blessed because the next year is the 7th year, the Shemitah year, which is the last year. So what that means, I believe the 7-year tribulation or the 70th week of Daniel is according to the Shemitah cycle as well, which means the tribulation cannot start this year, cannot start next year. But Rosh Hashanah 2022 begins a new 7-year cycle. If the tribulation, I'm not saying it will definitely start in 2022 on Rosh Hashanah, but if it doesn't start, it can't start until Rosh Hashanah of 2029. And then 2036. So we have to, when we understand God's calendar, we don't get carried away with thinking the rapture is going to happen today or the tribulation is going to start tomorrow. No, it happens according to God's time clock. That also gives us some peace of mind as well and helps us plan and prepare. Okay. Now, let's see. We're going to go to Genesis 42, verse 1 through 5. I may have added, some of these verses I think I've added, so I don't know what's on your notes or not, but was that on your notes? No. Okay, so Genesis 42, 1 through 5 is not on your notes, but I want to bring out something that I thought was very interesting. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. And he said to his sons, why are you staring at each other? Why are you looking at your navel? Do something. Why is it Jacob, who is an old man, is the first one to hear of the news of what's going on in Egypt, and his brothers are just staring at each other, not doing anything? I thought that was kind of interesting. Jacob says, hey, I have had news that there's grain in Egypt. Go do something. Go down there and get grain so that life and not death may be ours. Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob didn't send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he said, lest perhaps harm happen to him. The sons of Israel came to buy among those who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So in other words, Jacob, this old man, his brothers were in their 40s. Okay, or his sons, the brothers, Joseph's brothers, Jacob's sons were in their 40s. And Jacob, the old guy, he's around 120, says, wake up and do something. Okay, so why was he the one who was tuned into the news? Now, the other thing, other than the account of Yehuda or Judah and Tamar, everyone knows what happens with Judah and Tamar, Torah has not shared a word about what the other brothers were doing over the past 20 years. Think about it. Joseph has been gone for how many years? A total about 22 years. 20 years, okay, and then 2 years of famine have come before they meet. So Joseph has been gone for 22 years, but why does the Torah, other than Judah and Tamar, we read about what happened between Judah and Tamar, but why don't we read anything about what happened to the other brothers over the last 22 years? Why is the Torah silent? Are you following me? Okay, well, they were stuck. They were stuck. Haunted by their crime against their brother and against their father, they were emotionally frozen. They were spiritually paralyzed. They weren't going anywhere. How do you know that can happen to us sometimes? We do something or have experienced something and we just get stuck. We're deer in the headlights. And that's what had happened to the brothers for the last 20 years. Because of their crime against their brother Joseph, they were just stuck. And that's why we don't hear anything about what happened to them. So even though the brothers were living in the promised land, they're living in spiritual exile, enslaved by the irreversible ramifications of their own actions. Yet Joseph, who is free spiritually, is living in physical exile, distant from the land of his fathers. Isn't that interesting? So here, Joseph's brothers who committed this crime, even though they're in the promised land, they're in spiritual exile. And Joseph, who's in exile, is free. Fascinating. Well, let's look at Genesis 42. We're going to go to verse 14 through 18. And Joseph said, "It is as I said, you have come with some secret purpose, but in this way you're going to be put to the test. By the life of Pharaoh, you will not go away from this place till your youngest brother comes here." And then notice what he says to the brothers. "I want to send one of your number to go get your brother, and the rest of you get to be kept in prison." So they get decide which one goes back to get Benjamin and tell Jacob, all the brothers are imprisoned. And he said, so that your words may be tested to see if you are true. If not, by the life of Pharaoh, your purpose is certainly secret. So he put him in prison for how many days? Isn't that fascinating? And on the third day, Joseph, resurrects them out of prison. And he says, okay, do this if you would keep your lives, for I am a God-fearing man. So now he reverses his decision. And in verse 19 through 24, he says, okay, let one of your brothers be bound and the rest of you go home. And he says, go carry corn for the famine of your houses, but bring your youngest brother to me, so shall your words be verified, and you will not die. And so they did it, and they said one to another, watch this, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul, and when he sought us, we would not hear. How often does God call us because he is crying out to us and we will not hear? God says, when I call out to you, if you will not hear, when you cry out to me, I will not hear. And they said, this is why all the distresses come upon us. And Reuben, who was the oldest, said, didn't I tell you don't sin against the child? And you would not hear. Not only would they not listen to Joseph's cry, they would not listen to the eldest brother cry. And then he says, therefore, behold, also his blood is required. Okay, they thought, they had no idea. See, Joseph's brothers did not sell him into Egypt. Okay, the Midianites found him in the pit. The Midianites heard his cry. They got him out of the pit, but they ended up selling him to the Ishmaelites who sold him off to Egypt. Well, guess what? The brothers, as far as they knew, did end up getting eaten by an animal. They had no idea. And so now they're thinking that their blood will be required because of his blood being shed. But they didn't know that Joseph understood them because he had spoken through an interpreter. And so Joseph turns himself from him and he wept and then returned to them again. This is the first time Joseph got to hear that Reuben was on his side. And he communed with them and says, and took from them Simeon and bound them before their eyes. They're watching Simeon get bound. Now remember, they said, when he sought us, we would not hear. And Reuben says, I cried out, don't sin, and you would not hear. And what does Joseph do? He binds Simeon. And Simeon's name means to hear. He took their hearing from them. Matter of fact, look at Romans 11:8. According as it is written, God has given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear. To this day. Well, that's what happens. And that's why God is the one who gives hearing ears and seeing eyes. Now let's go to Genesis 42:27 and 28. Here we all know the story, so I'm just hitting highlights. As one of them opened his sack to give his donkey food in the inn, he sees his money in the sack. Oh no, and he said to his brothers, my money is restored, and see, it's even in my sack, and their heart failed them, and they were what? That's not really the best word. In Hebrew, it says they were shuddering with terror. They were shaking in their boots. Yes, they were afraid, but they were really afraid. And they said to one another, what has God done to us? All right. Here they're unnerved because here they left another brother, and the silver coming back was a reminder that Joseph was sold for silver. Look at Genesis 42:37 and 38. They go home. Reuben speaks to his father. You know, they got to have food. Jacob says, hey, we're hungry. We need food. Go back to Egypt. And Reuben's saying, hey, the guy said you got to bring Benjamin. Jacob said, no way, you're bringing Benjamin. And so look what Reuben says. Kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him to you. Deliver him into my hand and I'll bring him to you again. And he said, my son ain't going down with you. You're willing to kill my 2 grandsons? Are you nuts? You're already responsible for Joseph being gone. Now you want to kill your own 2 sons? You think I'm going to put my grandson or my son in your hands? You're crazy. And so let's look at chapter 43. Let's jump over there to verse 8 and 9. And let's look at what Judah says. Now, you got to remember, Judah has already lost a wife, 2 sons. He's experienced the pain of losing a spouse, of losing children. And so he has a little different response than Reuben. Judah says to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die. Both we and you, and also our little ones. In other words, I want everyone to live. Then Judah says, I will be surety for him. Of my hand shall you require him. If I don't bring him back to you and set him before you, let me bear the blame forever. Here we see Judah is finally taking responsibility. How many know sometimes we have to go through things before we can take responsibility? Look at Genesis 44, 1 and 2. What happens? So he commanded the steward, Joseph did, of his house, saying, okay, fill every man's sack with food as much as they can carry. Put every man's money back in their sack. But in addition to that, I want you to put my cup, the what cup? The silver cup. Now, silver speaks of redemption. In the mouth of the youngest and his corn money, and he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. And so now let's jump to verse 8 through 10. They say, behold, the money which we found in our sack's mouth, we brought again to you out of the land of Canaan. So how then should we steal out of your Lord's house silver or gold? They're saying, look, we're honest guys. We brought you the money back. Why would you think we would steal a silver cup? And then look what Judah says. With whomsoever of your servants to be found, let him die, and we will be my Lord's slaves. Wow, how many of you know it's not really good to be speaking foolhardily? Sometimes it comes back and bites you. And he said, now let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and you will be blameless. In other words, Joseph says, no, I'm not going to accept him that he dies, but he will be my slave, and the rest of you can go on your way. Now, here's the thing about this stolen cup. He used it, Joseph implied he used it to divine for looking into, seeing what's going to happen. Well, if you remember in Genesis 31:19, when Laban went to shear his sheep, Rachel had stolen the images which were her father's. Guess what? Stealing tends to run in the family, especially stealing idols. Okay, so let's look at Genesis 31, verse 30 and 32. It says, and now, though you would needs be gone because you sore longed after your father's house, why have you stolen my gods, Laban says. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure you would take by force your daughters from me. And then look what Jacob says. This may be of where Judah got this idea. Jacob said, with whomsoever you find your gold, let him not live before our brothers discern what is yours with me and take it to you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Wow. And he said, let the one that stole them not live. And it's not much longer, Rachel dies. So Rachel's the mother of Benjamin. The silver cup in this whole incident brings back memories of the sources of all of Jacob's grief. And now the brothers who don't want to bring grief to their father Jacob, all of this is cascading down upon them. Rachel's death at Benjamin's birth, their sale of Joseph for silver, wanting to sell him, and now the potential death of Benjamin, spoken right from their own mouths. So our closing verse here in Genesis 44, verse 12 and 13. And he searched and began at the oldest and left at the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And what did they all do? They rent their clothes. Well, guess what? They also had rent Joseph's coat and dipped it in blood. How many realize it's always measure for measure? God always does everything appropriately and in measure. And I tell you what, if I'm going to get a spiritual spanking, I want it done now, not later. So we need to be thankful when God disciplines us, because I want it all resolved before I stand before the court in heaven. Amen? We are in the book of Ezekiel, and we are in that famous chapter 37, with the valley of dry bones. So let's take a look at this. In Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 1 through 3. Ezekiel says, the hand of the Lord had been on me, And he took me out in the Spirit of the Lord, and then he puts me down right in the middle. I'd ask God, put me at the edge. Don't stick me right in the middle of this. And it was full of bones. Now, how many of you know, what tribe was Ezekiel from? Oh, all of you know. All of you know. He was a priest. Okay, he's not only a Levite, he's a son of Aaron. Ezekiel's a priest. Now, where's the last place a priest wants to be? Around a bunch of dead bodies. The Torah says, stay away from dead bodies. And here God drops him. Think of this. He's a priest and God drops him in the middle of a valley of dead people with all the bones piled up. He can't even run away without running over a bone. And he said, and he made me go past them around about. And I saw there was a very great number of them on the face of the wide valley. And they were what? They were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, is it possible for these bones to come to life? And I made an answer and said, oh God, only you know. Now here's what's fascinating. What one of the commentators said, the question was not, is it possible for these bones to come to life? Is it possible for these bones to come to life? In other words, were they worthy to be brought to life? And he's saying, well, only you know. That's just another way of looking at this. Let's look at verse 4 through 6. And then what does God tell Ezekiel to do? Prophesy over these bones. And here's what I want you to say. Oh, you dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Now, who is he speaking to? Who is Ezekiel speaking to? Dry bones. He said, prophesy to these bones, and I want you to tell the bones this. Hear the word of the Lord. Now, do bones have ears? But he's saying, okay, listen to this, O you dry bones. Hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, behold, I will cause what? Breath to enter into you, and you'll live. I will lay sinews upon you. I'll bring flesh upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord. You know what's fascinating about this? These dead bones obeyed and heard the word of the Lord when the living bones didn't. Look at Jeremiah 2:4. It's the same phrase. Hear ye the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. Here the same phrase is spoken to all the living bones, but they're dead inside. But the dead bones hear the word of the Lord, and they get flesh put upon them. I just thought that was kind of interesting. So the same words ignored earlier by the living were found to be more receptive by those who were dead. Look at verse 7 through 9. Ezekiel says, so I gave word as I was ordered, and at my words there was a shaking of the earth, and the bones started coming together. The knee bone connected to the hip bone connected. And looking, he says, I saw that muscles were now coming on them, and flesh came on them, and they were covered with skin, but the problem is there was no breath. And so God tells him, okay, speak again and be a prophet to the wind. Be a prophet. Twice he says, son of man, and now I want you to speak to the wind. So the first time he speaks to who? The bones. And the bones come together. But the problem is, just like Adam, when he was created, the bone and the skin came together, but he was still dead. There was no breath. So now he's got to prophesy breath, but he speaks to the wind. The Ruach, which represents the Holy Spirit. And he says, say to the wind, the Lord has said, come from the four winds, O wind, breathing on these dead so they may come to life. So we see, first off, this process was a two-step process. Well, think about this with the current nation of Israel. Israel gained a physical appearance of nationhood in 1948, but it's still waiting for the Spirit of God and the Messianic era to really come to life. You see, this is kind of fascinating. This is where we're at. Let's look at Ezekiel 37, verse 10 through 12. And I gave the word at his orders, and breath came into them, and they came to life, and they got upon their feet, a very great army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are all the children of Israel, and see, look at what they're saying. Okay, so in other words, the vision he just saw of all these dead bones are the living people in Israel who are dead. And look at what they're saying. Our bones have become dry. Our hope is gone. We are cut off completely. He says, for this cause be a prophet now to Israel and say to them, this is what the Lord has said. Look, Hene, behold, I am opening the resting places of your dead, and I will make you come up out of your resting places, O my people, and I will take you into the land of Israel. Wow, they're in Babylon right now. Okay, Ezekiel's speaking to all the Jews in Babylon. But what they say their hope is lost, but God is saying, never give up hope. Hope, if we don't have hope, even as Apostle Paul says, we are of all people most miserable. How many of you are hoping that he returns? Hey, I tell you what, if we never thought he would, we wouldn't have very much hope, would we? Look at Ezekiel 37, verse 13 and 14. Look what he says. You will be certain that I am the Lord by my opening your graves and making you come out of your resting places. O my people. And then he says, I'm going to put my spirit in you so that you may come to life, and I will give you a rest in your land, and you will be certain that I, the Lord, have said it, and I've done it, says the Lord. Wow, I think it's also interesting that in Israel, when the Lord rose, they said many of the other people arose also and walked around. One of the questions was, well, did they have to die again, or did they just go right to heaven, or what happened? I don't know. Okay, let's look at verse 15 through 17. The word of the Lord came to me again. And this time he said, you, son of man, take a stick, and I want you to write on it, for Judah and for the children of Israel who are in his company. Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the children of Israel who are in his company. And he says, then I want you to join them one to another and make them what? One stick, so that they may be one in your hand. So if you remember, after Solomon, the kingdom of Israel got split between Rehoboam, Jeroboam. You had the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. Israel was divided, but now God says in the messianic times that are coming, they're going to be one again. Look at verse 18 through 20. And when the children of your people say to you, please make clear to us what in the world you are doing. Tell them, this is what the Lord has said. See, I'm taking this stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel who are with his company, and I'm going to put it on the stick of Judah and make them one stick. I want to point something out. Notice he didn't take the stick of Judah and put it on Ephraim. He took the stick of Ephraim and he put it on Judah. And they became one stick. They will be one in my hand, and the sticks with your writing on them will be in your hand before their eyes. What this implies in the Hebrew, you may not totally understand in the English, is they're going to be joined to the point no one can tell they were ever divided. If you have a vase and it breaks in half, or a cookie jar, and you glue it, everyone can see the crack even though it's back together. But when God unites these two sticks, it implies it'll be to the point where you never knew it was ever divided. That's incredible. So now let's look at verse 21 and 22. And he says, and I want you to tell this. These are the words of the Lord. Notice how Ezekiel doesn't take any of the credit. He's never saying, look what I'm telling you, the Lord told me. No. He's just being a simple prophet declaring what God said. He says, I am taking the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I'm going to get them together on every side and take them into their land, and I will make them how many nations? One nation on the mountains of Israel, not Argentina, okay? There will be one king, will be king over them all. They will no longer be two nations, and they will no longer be parted into two kingdoms. Now, here's the thing. Goes back to the year of Jubilee. You can only keep the year of Jubilee when Israel is one nation and they're all in the land. This is why at the resurrection of the dead, God is going to gather the elect from the four nations of the earth, because I believe he'll come back in the year of Jubilee and everyone has to be there. So he's going to gather them. Now look at Ezekiel 37, verse 23 and 24. It goes on. This is the good news. Now this we know has not happened yet. They will no longer make themselves unclean with their images or with their hated things or with any of their sins. God says, I will give them salvation from all their turning away in which they've done evil, and I will make them clean. And they will be to me a people. I will be to them a God. And look at this. And my servant David will be king over them, and they will have one keeper. They will be guided by my orders and will keep my rules and do them. I tell you what, this here is proof of the resurrection of the dead. This hasn't happened yet, and David's going to come back, and he's going to be king over them again. And I'm sure he will do it right this time. Look at verse 25 and 26. They're going to be living in the land which I gave to Jacob, my servant, in which your fathers were living. And they will go on living there, they and their children and their children's children, for how long? How long is forever? Okay, and it's all the land of Israel. The land of Israel is not to be divided. There's not to be two capitals, a Palestinian capital in Jerusalem. It isn't happening. And David, my servant, will be their ruler for how long? Forever. So we know this hasn't happened yet, because we're in a part of forever right now. And I will make an agreement of peace with them. It will be a, how long? Eternal agreement with them. I will have my mercy on them. I will make their numbers great. I will put my holy place among them for how long? Forever. How long is forever? Okay, his holy place, I believe that's speaking of the heavenly Jerusalem. When it comes down, it's not going to come down over the United States. It's going to be coming down over Jerusalem. And then look at verse 27 and 28. What a promise. God says, my house will be over them. I can just see the heavenly Jerusalem hovering down and hovering right over Jerusalem. And he says, I will be to them a God. They're going to be to me a people. And look at this. All the nations are really going to know that I'm the one who makes Israel holy, that I am the Lord, when my holy place is among them forever. What I think is interesting is look at Revelation 21, verse 2. John says, I saw the holy town, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God like a bride made beautiful for her husband. Ezekiel is giving them hope. He's telling them, look, Israel, you're like a bunch of dead, scattered bones. But guess what? You're scattered among the nations, but unity and life forevermore is coming. Now that would give someone hope. Let's go to Ezekiel 38. Right after the gathering of the bones comes the battle of Gog and Magog. It says, the word of the Lord came to me again, saying, Son of man, now let your face be turned against Gog of the land of Magog, the ruler of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. And now I want you to prophesy against them. He was prophesying for Israel in the land of Israel. Now he's prophesying against Gog. And he says, say to them, this is what the Lord has said. I am against you, O Gog, ruler of Rosh. Rosh means head. In other words, they think, they're at the head. Meshach and Tubal, and turning you around, look what God says I'm going to do. I'm going to put hooks in your mouth. God says, I'm going to go fishing. And I'm going to put this hook in your mouth and set the hook. And I'm going to make you come out with all of your army, horses and horsemen, all of them in full war dress, a great force with breastplate and body cover, all of them armed with swords. Wow. Here's something I found fascinating. If you look at the screen, the phrase Gog and Magog in Hebrew totals 70. So I believe this battle of Gog and Magog is really the 70 nations. It's like what God created. He separated and divided the nations to all the earth. They were divided into 70 nations, which is why on Sukkot they slay 70 bulls, one bull for every nation. And there's a good chance this Gog and Magog war is going to be all the nations coming up against Jerusalem. Oh, I'm reminded of something here. Just one second. I got to escape. There was something I wanted to do I didn't have a chance to do. We're going to come here in just a second. Okay. So now let's look at Ezekiel 38, 5 through 8. The word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man. Oh, we already read that one. Let's go to Ezekiel 38, 5 through 8. Let's look at some of the countries coming against Israel. Persia, who's Persia? Iran. Cush, who's Cush? Let me show you. Let's go to this map. Sudan. Do you see Sudan? Underneath is the word Cush. Libya is Put. Do you see that? Let's go on. Okay. All of them with body cover and metal headdress, Gomer and all her forces, people of Togarmah in the innermost parts of the north, with all his forces, a great number of people with you. And then what does he say? Get ready. Make yourself ready, you and all the forces who are with you, and be ready for what? God is in total control of all the nations. He's got a hook in their mouth, and now he says, obey. And guess what they have to do? All right, I have a puppy, and I tried to get him to obey. Sometimes I have to put a leash on his neck. You will obey. Well, that's kind of what God is doing. The nations, they think they're so tough, but God's putting a hook in their jaw, and he says, come here. And they're going to come. Look at this. He says, be ready, make yourself ready, you and all the forces who are with you, and be ready for my orders, because after a long time, you're going to get my orders. In the what? Miketz. In the last years, you're going to come into the land which has been given back from the sword. Well, guess what? That couldn't have happened until 1948. It's now been given back, which has been gotten together out of a great number of people, and they're all in the mountains of Israel. So he's going to bring this horde onto the mountains of Israel, which have ever been a waste, but it has been taken out from the nations, and they will be living all of them without fear of danger. Let's look at verse 9 through 12 of Ezekiel 38. It says, and you will go up. You will come like a storm. You're going to be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your forces, and a great number of people with you. And this is what the Lord has said. In that day, it will come about that things are going to come into your mind, and you are going to have evil thoughts. And you're going to say, I'm going to go up to the land of small, unwalled towns. I will go to those who are quiet, living all of them without fear of danger, without walls or locks or doors. And I'm going to take their property by force and go off with their goods, turning your hand against the waste places which are now peopled, and against the people who have been gotten together out of the nations, who've got cattle and goods for themselves, who are living in the middle of the earth. Wow, Israel's in the middle of the earth. In case you didn't know, that is the center. Now look at verse 13 and 14. Sheba and Dedan and her traders, Tarshish with all her traders, will say to Gog and Magog, have you come also to take our goods? Have you got your armies together to take away our property by force, to take away our silver, gold, cattle, goods, to go off with great wealth? Okay, look at the map. Sheba and Dedan is Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, it looks like, is not involved with the Gog-Magog war and attacking Israel. They're wondering, are you who are attacking Israel going to come attack us too? In other words, Saudi Arabia is going to be an ally, okay, of some of the nations who don't want to attack Israel, but they're being attacked, and now Saudi Arabia is going to wonder, are you going to invade us also? Isn't that fascinating when Iran, who is part of the attack, their greatest enemy is Saudi Arabia, really, Saudi Arabia and Iran. So we are being set up for this Gog-Magog war, where Saudi Arabia could very well wonder and ask Iran, do you plan on coming over here, or are you just attacking Israel? So what role is Saudi Arabia going to play in this attack? We'll see. It says, for this cause, son of man, be a prophet and say to Gog, these are the words of the Lord, in that day when my people of Israel are living without fear or danger, will you not be moved against them? Okay, here we come. Ezekiel 38, 15 and 16. You're going to come from your place in the inmost parts of the north. Now, in case you didn't know, Moscow is directly north of Jerusalem when you go the farthest north. I mean, that's interesting. And it says, all of them on horseback, a great force, a strong army. You will come against my people Israel like a cloud covering the land. And it will come about in when? Miketz. In the last days, I'm going to make you. God says, I'm going to make you come against my land. So when Israel is under attack, we don't need to panic and fear. We just need to be praying that God's will is done, because God is the one who's bringing them. It's like setting a trap. God's setting a trap. How many of you know we don't always know what's going on in the background? We don't know. So our hope is always in God. It's never in man. Okay. And look at this. I'm going to make you come against my land. It's still God's land. God hasn't changed lands. So that the nations may have knowledge of me when I make myself holy in you, O Gog, before their eyes. In other words, when I wipe you out, when you come on Israel, everyone's going to know that Israel didn't do it, I did it. God is saying, I did it. Thank you for joining with us. We hope you learned something new today. Please partner with us in fulfilling the scriptures about taking God's Torah to the nations. You can watch this whole program for free, along with all of our other archive programs right from our website link shown below. We hope to see you soon at our location right here in Tacoma, Washington. See you soon.